Have you ever wondered why some people seem to grow larger inside when life challenges them, while others shrink as if the world is suddenly too heavy for their bones? It's almost unsettling the way two people can face the same truth, the same moment, the same disruption. And one becomes defensive, rigid, unwilling to shift even an inch, while the other softens, breathes, and somehow expands. You've met both kinds. One clings to certainty like a shield, the other walks quietly toward the unknown, as if the unfamiliar is not an enemy but a door waiting to be opened. You stand before these two doors in your own life more often than you realize, one labeled certainty, the other unknown. Most people choose certainty because it feels safer, cleaner, easier to control. But an open mind steps toward the unknown not because it is fearless, but because it has learned to understand fear instead of being ruled by it. It recognizes that fear is simply a message, a trembling light at the edge of something new. And you've probably seen glimpses of this in yourself. A moment when someone disagreed with you, and instead of tightening, you listened. A moment when life didn't go as planned, and instead of breaking, you bent. A moment when conflict didn't feel like a battlefield, but a mirror reflecting something deeper. Think back to someone you know, maybe a friend, maybe a stranger who didn't argue to win but to understand. Someone who asked, "What makes you see it that way?" and meant it. People like this often carry an invisible strength that psychology calls cognitive flexibility, the brain's ability to update, shift, and integrate new information without collapsing under the weight of it. Neuroscience shows that open-minded individuals have calmer amygdala responses during disagreement, meaning their brains don't treat new ideas as threats. Their minds don't lock shut, they stretch. And yet, the strength of an open mind isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It shows itself in soft ways in the person who listens when others scream, in the one who pauses before reacting, in the one who doesn't need the world to match their inner map in order for them to feel safe. Open-mindedness becomes a kind of internal spaciousness, a widening of the self, a doorway through which empathy, curiosity, and humility enter without resistance. But this ability, this quiet expansion, doesn't appear out of nowhere. It doesn't arrive fully formed in adulthood. It begins in a place most people forget to look: childhood. Have you ever noticed how some children don't just grow up? They watch themselves grow, as if even at a young age, they're quietly studying the world around them, trying to understand why people say one thing and feel another. Open-mindedness often begins long before you ever learn the word for it in rooms you barely remember, in moments that seemed ordinary at the time but shaped the entire architecture of your mind. Maybe you were that child who grew up between two different emotional worlds. One parent harsh, the other gentle. One moment calm, the next moment chaos. You learned early that truth was not singular, that two people could experience the same situation and tell two completely different stories about it. And instead of choosing sides, you began to navigate the space between them. That space became your classroom. That tension became your first teacher. Or perhaps you were the child who asked too many questions, not because you wanted attention, but because something inside you refused to accept surface-level explanations. You felt the world like a puzzle missing several pieces. And the adults around you were often too tired, too guarded, or too afraid to answer your whys. So you found answers in books, in quiet corners, in imagination. That imagination, wild and uncontained, became a refuge, a place where contradictions could coexist without breaking you. Some children learn flexibility not through encouragement, but through necessity. Picture a small room thick with the sound of arguments. A child sits in the corner, knees drawn in, listening not to the words, but to the emotions underneath them: anger, protecting, fear, silence, hiding, sorrow, resentment, masking, longing. That child learns to decode people. They learn that every reaction has a root, every belief has a history. Neuroscientists call this early emotional mapping a foundation for cognitive openness, the capacity to see nuance instead of absolutes. For others, silence was the teacher. A quiet home, not hostile but emotionally distant, where you learned to listen to the unspoken. You paid attention to tones, to pauses, to the invisible tension between sentences. You became fluent in subtleties that most adults overlook. And without knowing it, you developed a mind that bends before it breaks, a heart that understands before it judges. This is how the seeds of open-mindedness are planted in complexity, in contradiction, in the soft ache of trying to understand a world that rarely explains itself. What begins as survival or curiosity becomes something else entirely in adulthood. Have you ever met someone who seems to move through life with a kind of quiet clarity, as if they're listening to a frequency the rest of the world is too loud to hear? As you grow older, the seeds planted during childhood don't disappear. They mature into behaviors that most people never stop long enough to understand. And without realizing it, you begin to wear a very different kind of mask. Not one that hides who you are, but one that protects your ability to stay open in a world that demands you choose a side. You start to notice it in small moments. Someone raises their voice at you, expecting you to match their intensity. Instead, you pause. You don't retreat, you simply wait, letting the moment breathe. It isn't weakness. It's a deeply wired instinct to understand before you respond. Your mind treats the situation like a mirror, reflecting not just the words spoken, but the wound behind them. You can sense when anger is actually fear, when harshness is really exhaustion, when silence is a plea for help. Most people react to the mask someone wears. You react to the person behind it. You've likely felt this in arguments too. Where others seek victory, you seek clarity, not because you want to be right, but because you want to understand what truth is hiding beneath the noise. Psychology calls this integrative complexity, the ability to hold multiple perspectives without collapsing into rigidity. Neuroscience suggests that your brain doesn't see disagreement as a threat, but as a doorway, an unbuilt box waiting to be explored rather than defended. In relationships, this open-mindedness shows up in even softer ways. When your partner admits something difficult, you don't punish their vulnerability or shut down the moment. You lean in. You ask questions that feel like gentle hands brushing dust off a hidden story. And it's this curiosity, this refusal to assume, that makes people feel strangely safe around you, as if they can hand you their chaos and you won't flinch. But the most revealing manifestation is your relationship with uncertainty. While most people cling to certainty like a lifeline, you've learned to stand in the fog without demanding it clear immediately. Life has taught you that the unknown isn't always a monster. Sometimes it's just a hallway leading somewhere unexpected. And instead of filling every silence with noise, you let space exist. You let questions exist. You let life unfold without forcing it into rigid shapes. Yet, these behaviors are not accidental. There is more beneath the surface than habit or personality. There is a science to this. Have you ever wondered why some people can sit in the middle of a disagreement without feeling the need to defend themselves, while others react as if their entire identity is under attack? It isn't just emotional maturity or personality. There is something happening deep in the architecture of the brain, something quietly shaping how you respond to ideas, conflict, and truth itself. Inside every mind, there is a constant negotiation between two forces. The part of you that seeks safety in the familiar, and the part that is willing to explore the unfamiliar. For most people, the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, fires the moment their beliefs are challenged. It interprets new information as a potential threat, triggering defensiveness, anger, or withdrawal. But in an open-minded person, the amygdala is calmer, more discerning. It doesn't sound the siren at every difference of opinion. Instead, it pauses, evaluates, and allows space for curiosity. This is why you sometimes feel yourself observing your own reactions, choosing understanding over reflex. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for reasoning, perspective taking, and emotional regulation, becomes your ally in these moments. It steps in like a gentle narrator saying, "Wait, let's see this from another angle." Neuroscientists call this cognitive flexibility, the ability to update your beliefs when presented with new evidence rather than clinging to them like a shield. It's the mental equivalent of bending so you don't break. You've probably felt this in your own relationships. When someone confronts you with a truth you didn't expect, your mind doesn't collapse into defensiveness. Instead, it expands. It searches for nuance. It holds two truths at once, yours and theirs, without drowning in the conflict. Psychologists call this integrative complexity, a trait linked to emotional openness and adaptive intelligence. It's what allows you to solve problems that others avoid, to navigate emotionally charged moments without losing yourself, to see possibilities where others see dead ends. This is also why you don't feel personally attacked when someone disagrees with you. Your brain doesn't interpret disagreement as rejection. Your attachment patterns aren't built on fear of being wrong. You understand, instinctively, that a belief is not the same as a self, that growth only happens when the mind is willing to let go of old walls and let new light in. But neuroscience also reveals something else, something people rarely talk about. Because every strength, no matter how beautiful, carries a shadow. Even this one. Have you ever noticed that the same mind that sees the world from many angles often pays a quiet price for that ability? People romanticize open-mindedness as wisdom, as enlightenment, as the gentlest kind of strength, but they rarely speak about the loneliness that hides beneath it. Because when you can hold multiple truths at once, you also hold multiple burdens. There are days when your openness feels less like a gift and more like a doorway everyone walks through. You become the bridge between conflicting people, the one who listens when others refuse, the one who absorbs emotional tension like a sponge left out in a storm. And the strange part is, no one realizes they're walking across you. They just keep moving, relieved that someone took the weight off their shoulders, unaware that it settled onto yours instead. You've felt it sitting in a room where two people argue, and instead of choosing a side, you understand both. Instead of anger, you feel empathy. Instead of judgment, you feel sorrow. But empathy is a beautiful blade with two sharp edges. It lets you see someone's pain, but it also lets their pain live inside you. Psychologists call this emotional contagion, a phenomenon where the nervous system mirrors the suffering of others. You don't just understand their wounds, you carry them, like stones in the pocket of your own heart. There are moments when being open-minded feels like being a mirror, reflecting too many faces. You lose track of your own expression. You become so good at understanding others that you forget how to articulate what you feel. This is where the shadow begins, in the quiet erosion of your own boundaries. People assume your calm is indifference, your neutrality is avoidance, your ability to pause is hesitation. They misunderstand your depth as distance. And the more they misread you, the more isolated you feel inside your own vastness. The open mind is also vulnerable to manipulation. Because you see everyone's humanity, you assume they see yours. Because you give others room to explain themselves, you believe they will offer you the same grace. But not everyone values nuance. Some take advantage of the space you create. Some use your empathy as leverage. Some exploit your patience because they mistake it for passivity. And then comes the exhaustion, the silent fatigue of carrying too many perspectives, too many possibilities, too many emotional worlds inside one chest. The candle burns on both ends, flickering in the middle, overwhelmed by its own generosity. And society doesn't always make this easier. Have you ever noticed how society praises open-mindedness in theory, yet punishes it in practice? People love the idea of those who can see all sides, who can think freely, who can rise above bias. But the moment you actually question the beliefs that hold a group together, whether it's a family, a workplace, or a community, something shifts. Admiration becomes suspicion. Curiosity becomes threat. Your open mind becomes a quiet rebellion that people don't know how to handle. You probably felt the first sting of this long before adulthood. Maybe as a child, you asked a simple question that made the room fall silent. But why do we believe that? And the answer wasn't an explanation. It was a warning. Families often carry belief systems like fragile heirlooms passed down through generations. To question them is to risk breaking something sacred. So, instead of encouraging your curiosity, the people around you taught you to shrink it. They wanted you to believe what we believe, even if it didn't fit the shape of your own mind. Then you grew older and entered environments where certainty is currency. Workplaces reward the person who speaks fast, not necessarily the one who thinks deeply. Leaders are expected to project confidence, not contemplation. And when you pause, reflect, or ask nuanced questions, people misinterpret it as hesitation. In a world addicted to speed, thoughtfulness is mistaken for weakness. The culture values conclusions, not exploration. Social and political tribes are even harsher. Each group builds its identity on shared beliefs, shared enemies, shared narratives. The moment you question your own side, you become an outsider. You are told to pick a team, to stand firm, to not overthink. But your mind refuses to compress itself into a single box. You see humanity where others see enemies. You see complexity where others demand simplicity. And so you walk between worlds, not fully belonging to any of them. Philosophers call this the burden of consciousness. When you can hold more than one truth at a time, you often find yourself belonging nowhere. People fear what doesn't mirror them. They fear what doesn't choose them. And an open mind, by definition, cannot belong to a single tribe. It belongs to reality itself, fluid, shifting, uncontained. This is the paradox. Society celebrates open-mindedness in slogans, but rewards conformity in behavior. It loves the idea of growth, but clings desperately to its old beliefs. And you, caught in the middle, learn to exist in a quiet space between acceptance and exile. And this comes with emotional consequences they rarely talk about. Have you ever felt the weight of knowing too much, sensing too deeply, understanding too broadly? Because the inner world of an open mind is rarely peaceful, it is vast, swirling, and sometimes unbearably quiet. People think open-mindedness makes life easier, but in truth, it often complicates everything. When you can see every angle, every possibility, every hidden motive beneath a simple moment, decisions that should take seconds can stretch into hours. Your thoughts don't move in straight lines. They branch like rivers, each direction revealing a different truth. There are nights when you lie awake, replaying conversations that others have long forgotten. Not because you crave control, but because you can hear every unspoken tone, every muted emotion, every subtle shift in the air. It's like hearing echoes in a room no one else can sense. You overthink not out of insecurity, but out of awareness, an awareness so sharp it cuts into the quiet moments of your life. And then comes the loneliness. Not the loneliness of being physically alone, but the loneliness that comes from living in the mental space between two worlds. You understand people who disagree with each other. You feel compassion for both sides of a conflict. You see validity in arguments others refuse to acknowledge. But standing between these emotional mountains means you rarely get to stand fully with anyone. You become the mediator, the translator, the balancing force. And even if you don't complain, the role leaves a lingering ache, the ache of never belonging entirely. Sometimes you feel responsible for seeing all sides, for holding truths others won't hold, for being emotionally generous in situations where others demand simplicity. But carrying multiple truths is like carrying multiple lives, heavy, beautiful, and exhausting. You might find yourself questioning who you are because your identity refuses to harden into something rigid. You bend, you adapt, you understand, but sometimes you wish you could just choose one path without feeling the tug of all the others. Psychologists call this decision fatigue. Neuroscientists call it cognitive overload. You call it another night staring at the ceiling, wondering why everyone else seems to live in clearer shapes while you live in shifting colours. But even in the exhaustion, there is something quietly noble in the way you think. Your mind is a landscape of depth, a place where empathy lives beside logic, where nuance breathes beside truth. It is not fragile, it is simply full. Yet the story doesn't end with struggle, because an open mind is not a burden, it is a path, and like every path, it can be walked with wisdom. Have you ever wondered why the gentlest strengths require the firmest protection? An open mind can feel like a wide window facing the world, filled with light, filled with air, but also exposed to every storm that passes. And if you don't learn how to anchor yourself, the very quality that makes you wise can also leave you overwhelmed, scattered, and quietly exhausted. You start noticing it in small, private moments, the endless stream of information, opinions, emotions, and subtle energies you absorb without meaning to. Your openness becomes a doorway with no lock. Family members unload their frustrations onto you. Friends seek your clarity when they're confused. Strangers sense your empathy and share more than you asked for. And slowly, the line between compassion and self-sacrifice begins to blur. This is where protecting your mind becomes an act of self-respect. Psychologists call it cognitive boundary setting, the ability to decide what enters your mental space and what does not. It means acknowledging that your mind is not a public hallway for everyone's unresolved pain. Sometimes you must gently close the door, even to people you love, not out of coldness, but out of wisdom. Not because you don't care, but because you care too deeply. There will be moments when your empathy floods you, when you feel someone's sorrow like a weight in your own chest. That is when you learn the art of pausing, a subtle skill where you step back into your body, place your hand on your sternum, breathe, and remind yourself, their feelings are not my feelings. Their wounds are not my responsibility to carry. This is emotional grounding. This is the psychological equivalent of planting your feet in the earth before the wind arrives. And yet, protecting your mind doesn't mean shrinking it. You don't need to become rigid to stay whole. What you strengthen instead is your internal center, the quiet voice that says, "This is what I believe, even as I listen. This is who I am, even as I understand others." Identity is not the opposite of open-mindedness. Identity is the anchor that allows openness without drowning. Think of your mind as a garden. If everything is allowed to grow inside it, nothing truly thrives. But when you choose what to nurture, curiosity, compassion, truth, boundaries, the garden becomes not just open, but alive. Healing, for you, has never meant closing the mind. It means stabilizing it. It means giving yourself the right to step away, to recharge, to choose what you take in. When you do that, your openness becomes not a fracture, but a form of strength the world rarely understands. And when all is said and done, one truth remains. Have you ever realized how rare it is to meet someone who sees the world not as a fixed map, but as a landscape still being drawn? An open mind is not a personality trait, it is a living philosophy, a way of existing that refuses to harden, even when life gives you every reason to close. It is the courage to sit with uncertainty without demanding it turn into certainty. It is the quiet willingness to let truth arrive in its own time, in its own shape, without forcing it into the narrow boxes of your past. You carry this philosophy in small, invisible ways, in the way you listen before you judge, in the way you breathe before you react, in the way you hold space for contradictions, not because you enjoy confusion, but because you understand what most people forget. The world is not simple. People are not simple. Truth is not a single point, it is a horizon that shifts as you move closer to it. Your mind becomes like an open window at dawn, letting in the cold air and the warm light at the same time. Or like an unfinished room, where every new insight adds another wall, another doorway, another place to stand. You live in a house that is always growing, always expanding, always welcoming what other minds fear. And there is beauty in that. There is bravery in that. But there is also a deeper, more silent wisdom beneath it all. The understanding that open-mindedness is not agreement. It is not surrender. It is not indecision. It is the strength to look directly at reality without distorting it to protect your ego. It is the soft defiance of saying, I am willing to see what is true, even if it changes me. Most people seek comfort. You seek clarity. Most people protect their beliefs. You protect the possibility of growth. And as you stand in this inner landscape, this sky that never chooses one cloud, you begin to understand the question that opened your journey here. Why do some people expand when life challenges them, while others collapse? The answer is clearer now. You expand because your mind was never built to stay small. You expand because walls have always felt too tight for you. You expand because your soul recognizes something sacred in the unknown. And though the world may not always understand you, though people may mistake your openness for softness or indecision, you know the truth. An open mind is not fragile. It is spacious. It is alive. It is free. And perhaps, long after this moment ends, one quiet thought will remain with you, a whisper returning from the very beginning, a mind that stays open, never stops growing,